On today's edition, a highly respected and standout touring guitar tech, David Graefe. Guitar tech, studio tech, backline tech, guitar player, guitar builder, and luthier. Originally from West Texas, he has traveled the globe for over 40 years, being of service on concert stages and recording studios to names like Peter Frampton, Mark Knopfler, Jimmy Buffett, Wynonna, Michael Jackson, Rascal Flatts, The Eagles, Kenny Chesney, Tim McGraw, Doobie Brothers, Michael W. Smith, John Mellencamp, Foo Fighters, and many more. Dave has also worked and consulted for guitar manufacturers Washburn, Gibson, Taylor, PRS Guitars, and spent several years at the Strasbourg Lutherie. He is the pride of Hale Center, Texas. He is the David Graefe. Thanks for riding with us, Dave.
Hey, thank you for having me. How you doing today?
Awesome.
Good.
We lucked out with some good sunshine today.
Yeah, we did. You know, as you were sitting there talking about all the people I've worked with, it sounds like I can't keep a job.
That's right. What is the problem?
I don't know.
So, I'd like to talk about bus life and tour life. You're actively working right now. Did you just get off a bus or about to get back on a bus?
I live on a bus.
Yeah. Well, the bus becomes your home, right?
You know, I think there have been times in my life where I have actually been more at home on a bus and slept better on the bus just because it's rocking you to sleep and you just get used to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and you get home and it's quiet and it's like still and it's like, what's wrong? Something's wrong.
Right.
Well,
every tour is different. So right now, have you been on a consistent bus for a while now? Okay. How many people are on that bus?
You know, I think it kind of varies a little bit. I'm working with Tim McGraw right now this year. I call that my day job. Yeah. And you know, we'll have 8 to 10 people on the bus at any given time.
Okay.
And it depends on if we, sometimes we've been doing just what we call one-offs. You know, maybe one show we'll go out to do a festival, come back home. Maybe we'll do one weekend of shows, and then we come back home. Yeah. And a couple of people will fly in, so not everybody rides the bus. So the fewer people on the bus, you get a little more elbow room.
How many buses going on those dates right now?
Currently, we've got 3 buses on that. We've got a band bus, a crew bus, and then Tim's bus.
Well, and he's not doing full production. Otherwise, you would have a slew of buses.
Now, next year is going to be a whole different story.
Carrying full production.
Got on this particular tour, we've got one truck full of gear. It's just band gear and then the audio gear. Yeah. With the tour that is proposed for next year, it's going to be like 18 trucks. Yeah. And probably
similar
8 or 10 buses.
Yeah, 10 buses.
Who knows?
When was the first time you got on a real tour bus?
Oh my gosh. 1982.
Okay. I
was a local stagehand in Amarillo, Texas.
Okay.
And I mean, you had to go back to some back history, but I had kind of figured out just through default how being the farm kid who loves to tinker on things, just learned how to work on guitars and do, basic adjustments. Yeah. And I ended up working on a particular show as a local stagehand that I overheard somebody during the day going, "Man, too bad you can't actually work on a guitar," to the guitar tech, and the guitar tech going, "Shut up," and this banter going back and forth. I thought, I can do that.
Yeah.
And then later on, the band shows up, and the guitar player's over there in the corner warming up, and we're all sitting there watching him going, "Holy cow, wow, this is amazing." And he stops, and he's talking to somebody else, and says, "Too bad. I wish you could work on my guitars. I need to get some adjustments." And I thought, well, I can do that.
Yeah.
And so I spoke up.
Yeah.
And everybody turned and looked at me, and it's like, "And you are..."
Yeah.
And of course, all my buddies that were on the local crew were like, "Dude, you're going to get fired." I ended up working on a couple of guitars and just some tweaks, and ended up being offered a job.
Okay.
And I went home and got on a bus that night, and
that was your first bus?
That was my first experience.
And was it leaving out of Amarillo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I just went out for a very short time to fix some guitars.
Okay.
So I was going to college. I called my mom and I said, "Mom, I'm going to leave school for a little bit." And she's like, well, son, what are you going to do that for? And bless her heart, she was always so supportive of anything us kids wanted to do. Just go out and try it, see how it works. You might like it. And I said, well, I got offered a job to go on tour with a band for a minute. She goes, that's wonderful. What are you going to do? I said, I'm going to be a guitar tech. And she goes, that's fantastic. What's a guitar tech do? I said, I don't know. I think they just fix guitars. So not having a clue what I was doing. And she was like, well, what's the name of the band? And I told her the name of the band, which should probably remain silent because there's people that have pasts and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And, he was kind of known for thinking he was the devil at the time. But I told my mom his name, and she's like, well, he sounds like a nice boy. And I'm like, mm-hmm. I grew up in a Christian home. My mom and dad divorced when I was, 10 or something like that. Okay. And our family vacation was going to church camp. And so my idea of a wild party was like stealing a beer from, when I go visit my dad and, stealing a beer out of the fridge and running out behind the barn to drink it whenever, before I got caught. That was partying. And so I get on the bus, and of course, it's a little different atmosphere there than I grew up in. And I'd heard about these drugs. I'd never seen anything. And this stuff called pot. I thought, pot, whatever.
You'd heard about it.
Yeah, you cook stuff in that, right? Well, I get on the bus, and of course, they're smoking pot on the bus. I'm like, something's burning. And they're like, yeah, it is. Here, you want some? I'm like, that's drugs. They're going to throw us in jail. There's a cop right outside.
Yeah.
I was scared. I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
They showed me where my bunk was, and I put stuff in the bunk, and then I go to the back lounge, and the table was covered with cocaine, and a guy had his face planted in it and was like, dude, you want some of this? And I'm like, that's more drugs. Oh my gosh, we're going to jail. So I climb in my bunk, and I'm scared at this point. I'm certain that the security guard out there was coming on the bus to bust us.
Yeah.
So I closed the curtain of my bunk, and I'm like, what'd I get into? That's what I was thinking. And then I start hearing like people talking and laughing and squealing and carrying on, and I thought, what in the world? And I opened the curtain of my bunk just to look out and see a naked girl chasing a naked guy to the back of the bus, and I'm thinking, and we're going to hell. And I closed my curtain, and I'm really scared at this point. So that was my introduction to
you're thinking, what did I get myself into?
And I didn't last. I literally went out to work on a few guitars, and then I was like, I go to the guitar player, and I'm like, I don't belong out here. And he goes, we know. But you're really good with guitars. Keep it up. We'll work another day. And I go to the powers that be. I'm like, I don't belong out here. And they're like, we know. But you're really good. You're a hard worker. Keep it up. So they flew me home, and
that was breaking you into the business.
That was my introduction to the music business.
So we're going to back up a little bit. We're going to talk about this little dot on the map called Hale Center, Texas.
Yeah, and that's Hale Center.
Right. It sounds like I have a southern accent saying Hale, but it's Hale. So is it the kind of place where everybody knows everybody?
Oh yeah. There were when I left town, there were like 1,964 people in the town. I think that's what the population sign said.
And so you are one of 4 kids.
Yes. Yeah.
Lisa, Brent, yourself, and Sid.
That's correct.
So before grade school, maybe it was church. How did music enter your home? How did music?
Oh my gosh.
What's your first memories of music?
There was always music in our home. My mom's side of the family, her maiden name is Ivy, and my grandmother's maiden name was Dunn, D-U-N-N. And Papa Dunn, my great-grandfather, he was a songwriter. He has songs in the Baptist hymnal, and I couldn't tell you which ones they are. I knew at one time, but so there was a lot of that Southern gospel quartet history in my background.
Okay.
All of our family reunions were on the night of the 3rd of July, and then the whole family would get together, and this was on the Dunn side. My Uncle Joe Dunn, he played fiddle and sang, and he led. He was the director of the whole thing, and everybody would just bring their guitars, violin, steel guitar, banjo, didn't matter. Just bring whatever you had. There was a piano there, and then there was always food to eat. The kids are outside chasing each other, popping firecrackers and throwing rocks at each other. And then all the old folks were sitting in there listening to the music and singing along. And of course, as a kid, I wanted to be out there throwing rocks at my brother. I didn't want to listen to that old music.
Right.
Of course, now I have such a great appreciation for it. I wish that I had started doing that a long time before. But
So there's a lot of singing.
a lot of singing and a lot of the quartet stuff. A lot of harmony vocals. Bill Gaither was a big influence. That style of music.
Did any of your parents or your siblings have instruments?
We all played different instruments in the high school band.
So before that, though, as a child, when did instruments become
there was
a
always
thing?
a piano at the house.
Oh, okay.
And Mom played the piano.
Okay.
And Mom was an amazing piano player. And actually, up until a year and a half ago, when we moved her into this new facility, she was still playing the organ at church.
Wow.
And she couldn't, with her the situation that she is in now, she couldn't talk. She could say like two phrases: good shape and many things and wonderful. It's just like a few little phrases.
Right.
And but you'd put her behind the piano, and man, she would just go to town. And I call it the windshield wiper piano, where her hands are just going like, all over the piano, that ragtime,
Incredible.
Oh, it was so much fun. And she still plays the piano, even at the facility. They've got a grand piano there.
Really?
And they love to listen to her play. And she's beginning to slip with it now. But one of the things, whenever she started to get to where she couldn't talk, the power of music is so amazing.
Yeah.
We were sitting there kind of frustrated, exhausted. I was trying to understand. She was hunting for words, and it was just frustrating. And we're sitting there, and I thought, well, here we are. And I said, Mom, will you go play Under the Double Eagle for me? Oh, sure. And she sits down at the piano, and just takes off on the piano. And I'm like, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Oh, sure. And she plays that. And then Rubber Dolly. And she just, all these old standards,
Wow.
that I just grew up with. And then I grabbed my guitar and I started playing along with her. And we played for hours. And that became our language. We couldn't talk, but we could play. And as we were little kids, my mom made us take piano lessons it was a set amount of time. I don't remember if it was 3 months or 6 months or a year, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And at the end of that time period, we could stop. But we had to take it for that long.
Yeah.
If we wanted to keep going, she would make sure we kept
Yeah.
it going. But we didn't have to take it after that if we didn't want to. I could not wait for that time to be over with because I didn't want to play that piano. Piano was for sissies.
Right.
I wanted to ride my bike and throw rocks at my brother. I want to go eat dirt.
Okay, but I understand at some point your sister gave you a guitar.
Oh, my gosh.
You were about 16 years old?
Well, let
Something
me
like
tell
that?
you, you've done some research. So my thing was to soup up anything I had, make it as fast as I could go. Well, living in this little town, everybody knew everybody. The local police officer, his name was Frank Harper, and he kind of, back in those days, he kind of had a thing for my sister. And so he was just a few years older than us. And so he thought, well, us boys were kind of his in to be able to maybe go out with my sister, who was going to have none of that.
Right.
But that was his thought. So we, of course, took advantage of it. And, we would rat race the cop downtown, down Broad. We'd pull up beside him at the stoplight, and he'd look over, and he's like, So we ended up racing the cop down Main Street. And our rule was if you got away from him, he couldn't come back to the house and
Right.
give you a ticket or arrest you, because it was all fun and games. Well, one night I got in a little trouble because he thought it was somebody else. I took off and just, was outrunning the cop. Well, long story short, he called ahead, set up a roadblock, thinking I was some troublemaker.
Yeah, yeah.
And next thing you know, I landed in jail and had to call my mom to come get me out of jail. And I ended up grounded for, actually, I think I'm still grounded. and couldn't do anything but go to work and go to school. So I called my sister. She was going to South Plains College, taking their music curriculum. Being bored, I called her up. I said, "Child," we called her Sweet Child. My dad had nicknames for everybody, and hers was Sweet Child. So I said, "Child, I'm bored. Can I mess around with your guitar?" And she's like, "Sure, go ahead." So I picked it up and I started messing around with it. I didn't know what I was doing. And she drew out these chord charts of your major chords, put it in the mail, and I got it a week later. And just followed those chord charts, and that's when I started to learn to play guitar. And I took it and ran with it.
Yeah.
And she ended up going, "Wow, okay." And she gave me that guitar.
Yeah.
It was a cheap little, it was a little Strat copy, Fender Strat copy. And Aspen, I think, was the brand of it. And so that was my first guitar. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, you
Sweet child.
So before that guitar, had you played a guitar at all? Oh, wow.
Nah.
Well,
music was for sissies. But I played the saxophone in
grade school.
Let's see, I started playing in junior high, and then in the high school band.
Okay. And what attracted you to a saxophone?
My cousin had one that I could borrow.
Oh, okay.
And so we couldn't afford an instrument.
Yeah.
So I borrowed this saxophone,
Yeah.
and it was cool. And okay, well, I'm going to be in the band. So if you're play football or you're in the band, I was in the band.
And you still play some saxophone?
I do
occasionally.
I let's see. I ended up playing alto, tenor, and bari sax.
Awesome.
And in high school, I ended up with the bari sax. That was my instrument, and because there were a lot of altos and a few tenors.
Yeah.
So the school had a bari sax, and I did the bottom.
Yeah, low stuff.
Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
I ended up playing a little jazz quartet, quintet, that our band director put together for us, and just having fun with it. And I remember I would get bored with the music that was written, and I'd start making up parts. And the band director, he'd call me into his office. Harold Buffy was his name. Mr. Buffy would call me in his office. He's like, "Now, David, you got to stick to the music." I'm like, "But that's boring," and he goes, "I know, but I'm going to put together this little jazz ensemble for you." And there was a handful of us other sax players, and we ended up playing at pep rallies and going to state competitions and all that. I actually ended up with a scholarship to play sax at Graceland College, where I went to school.
Oh, okay.
And it was wonderful. It was just a supplemental, probably $1,000 or a semester or something like that. But
and so you ended up Graceland College.
Yeah.
That's sort of what led you there.
yeah,
And you majored in.
well, I ended up majoring in business.
Yeah.
In Graceland, it was sponsored by a church I grew up in, and it's in Lamona, Iowa.
Okay.
And it's just kind of where all of my family had gone. I had cousins that went there. My brother was there. And so never even thought about where I was going to go to school. I was just going to go to Graceland.
Yeah.
That's what we did.
Yeah.
You go to Graceland, get a degree, come back and work on the family farm.
Now, where was that in the sequence of working in Amarillo? You went to Amarillo first?
Well, actually, I went to Graceland first.
Oh, okay.
I went for one semester.
Okay.
And it was so far from home.
I was gonna say.
homesick. I missed my girlfriend. I missed all my buddies. I missed Mom. I'm a mama's boy.
Yeah.
And in fact, I wouldn't take in elementary school, I would not take my school picture unless I was sitting in my mama's lap.
Wow.
So I was a mama's boy. I miss my mom.
Yeah.
So I'm still kind of a mama's boy at 60 years old. I don't
Awesome.
know. But I went there for one semester, and I went back. I missed home so much. Mom said, "Stick it out for the semester, and then you can come home." And
Yeah.
into the semester, I moved back home.
Yeah.
All my friends were gone to school.
Yeah.
My girlfriend had another boyfriend. I was just like, what did I do this for?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I thought, well, okay, go to, and with, a lot of, words from my mom, just, mom's counseling and wisdom. She said, "Well, why don't you go to Amarillo College? Let's look at their auto mechanics. You're really good with that." And so I moved to Amarillo. got an apartment, went to school there.
All right, so you're in Amarillo,
Uh-huh.
though you already had some sort of skills for working on guitars. Where did that come from?
We grew up on a farm,
Okay.
the Graefe family farm,
Yeah.
and raised cattle. I mean, my first car was a John Deere tractor. So anyway, growing up on the farm, I was the farm kid that always took things apart. I'd find something and it's like, let's see how this works. And I'd take apart an old radio and see if I could fix it or see if I could figure out how it worked, put it back together, and I had extra parts and I was like, and I was always tinkering on stuff, we're out in the fields, something would break. We just learned how to fix stuff.
Yeah.
You figure it out. And, with the tractor or with the trucks, whatever. I got this guitar, this electric guitar. How does this thing work? Let's take it apart and see. And so took it apart and put it back together, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do?
Yeah.
And a friend of mine who is a guitar player said, let me see your guitar. And I handed it to him, and he's like, wow, you need to have it set up. And I thought, okay. I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
So I took it to a little music store that had a tech. I'm like, I need to have my guitar set up. And they're like, wow, yeah, you do. And so not thinking anything, and I'm trying to act like I did. And so I went back to pick it up the next day or week or whenever it was. And it played so much better. And I thought, what did they do? Yeah. And so I take it apart again. And I'm looking at all these things. I put it back together, messed it up, and I took it back. I need to have my guitar set up again. They're like, what'd you do to this thing? And I'm like, I'm just trying to figure it out. I don't know how it works, And so the tech was gracious enough to here, let me show you some things.
Oh, this is cool.
And so, these are the string height saddle adjustment screws.
Yeah.
Here's the truss rod adjustment. I'm like, what's a truss rod? And they're like, it's the rod that goes up the neck, and here's what it does, And I'm like, oh. So I took it home and I practiced on it, and I learned how to adjust it, and
That's
do my own
awesome.
setups.
That's great.
And so then I started working on a couple of my friends' guitars, and then that's how that started. And then I saw a Dean Flying V. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to have one of those. And I think at that time it was like $600, which it might as well have been $1 million. We were poor farmers.
Yeah.
We couldn't afford another guitar. There's no way.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, got a shop. There's wood out there. Let's go cut some wood. So I took that brochure from that Dean Flying V, and I took it home, and I took my little ruler and I measured it, and I took my measuring tape and I measured my guitar, my little Strat copy. And so I scaled that little picture up, some graph paper. I scaled it up to match. The only thing I knew is, okay, that neck had to be a certain geometry to work in regards to the bridge and all of that. So that had to be a constant. Okay, so I scaled it up to that and man, I took a 2x12 of red oak, and that was there's this black Flying V that was number one, and that's that guitar.
Okay.
And so I literally drew that tracing, that drawing that I had made of that Flying V. I drew it onto that piece of 2x12, and I cut other little pieces out of it and glued it on for the little tips of the wings of the V so it'd be wide enough. I took a jigsaw and cut that sucker out, and I made myself a guitar. I made a Flying V.
Wow. So, and you still have it.
Oh, I do. Yep, that's number one.
That's awesome.
And it looks like my first guitar.
I think it looks great. We're going to show that. And so let's talk about some of the pieces that we looked at that you've worked on.
Sure.
And I don't. Let's talk about an acoustic that you had. You said it was the second one that you built.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Okay, well, fast forward a little bit. I went to Graceland first semester, went back to Amarillo College, kind of discovered the road life. So I go back to Graceland. I end up playing bass and I didn't play bass. There was a guy that was on one of the dorms that was real close to where my room was, and he had a banjo. He was playing. I stuck my head in. I'm like, I play guitar. I played like just a little bit. He said, I know you play guitar. Do you play bass? I said, no. He said, I need a bass player for a bluegrass band. I said, well, if you can find me a bass, I can do it.
Right.
I'll figure it out.
Right.
So I learned how to play bass. Again, just self-taught. It was like, okay, how do you do this?
Yeah.
Well, while I was working with this bluegrass band, we ended up getting a gig at Six Flags Over Texas. Well, we needed a little PA system. Not knowing a single thing about a PA system, I go down to Independence, Missouri, okay, which is in the Kansas City area. Now, geographically speaking, Graceland is right between Kansas City and Des Moines, right there on I-35,
Okay.
and it's about 2 hours either way. So every other weekend, I was going to the music stores in Kansas City or the music stores in Des Moines, trying to figure out how to learn more about music and guitars and trying to be cool, actually. So I'm at Wild Woody's little guitar shop in Independence, Missouri. Wild Woody's was this little shopping center at Cousin Jed's Guitar Shed, which years later I ended up working at. But I was looking for a little PA system, didn't even know what I needed. But there was this guy that was talking to me about these speakers, and I knew he didn't work there because I just knew he didn't work there. But he knew a lot about them, so I was listening. And then finally I was like, you didn't even work here. Why are you telling me all this stuff? He goes, oh, my company builds these speakers. I thought, oh, that's cool. Yeah. And he gives me a card. And he says, well, we're a lutherie. We build guitars and repair all manner of stringed instruments. And the Strasburg Lutherie is the name of my company. And we have a side company called Crawford Creek Sound that builds these speakers. I thought, wow, that's cool. I built a guitar. And I'm all proud of myself. And he goes, cool. And then he hands me the Lutherie business card, the Strasburg Lutherie. And he goes, keep in touch. You never know what might become of a casual acquaintance.
Wow.
The beginning of my lesson in relationships. You know, the
networking.
And like 2 weeks later, I called him up. I said, hey, I'm going to be down in your neck of the woods. Can I stop by and see your shop? Yeah. He goes, you're going to be in my neck of the woods? You better stop by. All right, cool. And so I kept driving and driving and driving. And it was probably 45 minutes or so southeast of the Kansas City metro area, out in the middle of nowhere. Strasburg was this little town of like 170 people. And I get to the address, and I'm in this little podunk town. There's a post office and a grocery store that has a cafe in it. And right across the street from the cafe was this boarded up, abandoned looking old bank building. And that was the address. And I thought, that's lying no good son of a, kind of copped in attitude. Yeah. And I peeled out and I turned around. I was headed back to town all mad. I just happened to look in the rearview mirror, and I see Bob Abernathy was his name. Okay. I see him coming around the corner with a lawnmower, and I thought, well, I'm going to go give him a piece of my mind out here in the middle of nowhere. And I jumped out of the truck, and thank goodness he spoke first. Dave, so glad you made it. Come on in. And something told me, shut up, Dave. So I shut up. And I followed him inside this old abandoned-looking, boarded-up bank building, and there was the most amazing shop, instrument repair shop you've ever seen. Wow. I walk in, and here's a big pedal harp, in the corner. I'm thinking, wow, I thought only angels played those. A big harp, and there's violins, and there's cellos, and there's guitars, and there's wood stacked up and all this machinery, and I'm thinking, I'm in heaven. This is cool. Yeah. And it's a good thing I shut up. And I just let him show me around. Yeah. And I brought my little flying V that I had built, and I was so proud of, and I was just like, right. And so
the majority of what they build there are acoustic instruments, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, he built a lot of electric guitars, acoustic guitars. Okay. But as it turned out, he was an authority of ancient instruments. And so orchestras, auction houses, collectors, museums would send stuff to him to authenticate, to restore, to appraise. So I'm sitting here looking at a Stradivarius violin going, that's cool. And he goes, yeah, maybe you'll work on it one day. Well, as he took me under his wing, I would go down to his place on weekends, on holidays I would spend with him. And I actually ended up living with him and his family.
Wow.
In this little house that was attached to that bank building. And, you know, and so much became a part of their family that when he passed away, in the middle of the night, my phone rang. It was about 3 or 4 in the morning, and it was his wife.
Wow.
Called and said, Bobby passed away.
Wow.
And,
were you there in the city? Were you there?
No, I was actually in Nashville at that time.
Okay.
I had, moved on.
Okay.
I actually got a job offer from Washburn.
Okay.
And while I was working there, and so I moved on.
So they called you about him passing away.
Yeah.
Are you still in touch with the family? You still?
Oh yeah. Still very much a part of the family.
That's awesome.
They anytime I'm in the Kansas City area, I always call them, spend time with them. I'll go stay with them for Thanksgiving or something like that, with the family.
Very cool.
And
Very cool.
I'm just, this is Uncle Dave over here.
But nobody continued the business.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So tell me about that acoustic you showed me.
Oh,
Where that fits in the story.
That's my number 2 of my acoustic guitars that I've ever built. The first one was a kit. Was pieces that I had ordered and put together, and it was kind of a disaster. But I learned a lot. And then I was working with Bob, and Bob showed me a lot of guitar repair techniques and how to build and this sort of thing. So as his understudy, I learned a lot, and I kind of had some theories that, hey, maybe this would work. If I did this differently, maybe I could revoice the guitar if I changed the bracing pattern or, different things. I'm an electric player. Maybe I could carve the neck to where it felt more like my electric guitar. It'd be easier to play. Mm-hmm. So number 2 was kind of a mishmash of all these ideas that I had. So I go to Bob and I said, I want to practice my acoustic guitar building. He goes, sure, go pick you out some wood. Mm-hmm. The wood that he had, it's like that board of Gaboon ebony was about $1,000 board. Wow. A 2x4 about 6 foot long. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. So I go to the scrap pile, and this is all just scraps of wood from other projects, other instruments, and it's stuff that we would literally throw into the wood burning stove. And so I just pulled scraps out of that, and I built this guitar out of scraps.
Yeah.
And those scraps were all pieces that were chosen for the tonality that piece of wood had.
Okay.
So there was a lot of acoustic resonance. There's so much that goes into an acoustic guitar, or any guitar for that matter. Yeah. We'll tap on a board and listen for the frequencies, and then we'll go to the piano and we'll find that note, and we'll find the major triad based on that note. That note is in, and we'll find other boards that have sympathetic frequencies, and you end up, with a very resonant instrument.
Yeah.
That guitar, number 2,
Yeah.
the one I showed you,
Yeah.
is one of the from wood that was all chosen to work together.
That's great.
Sonically.
Yeah.
And I implemented a couple of my ideas of changing the bracing structure just to voice it a little differently. I took the blueprint of a Martin D28, and so I just started moving some of the braces to where I thought, well, okay, I like the mid punch, but I want it to have a little different bass. It's a little boomy. So if I make the brace go here, it'll kind of dampen the top of that guitar a little bit. And it won't be so boomy, and you do it on the bass side of the guitar. So it dampens the bass frequency. Gosh, back in the 90s, it got a little bit of a reputation around some of the friends, my guitar player friends.
Okay.
It just sounded good on tape. It had such a focused sound that it was very flat response. There were no frequencies that just poked out at you that they'd have to EQ out or in. So it set in a mix really well when you were recording with a lot of other instruments. And so a buddy of mine named Roger Nichols who is now produces a lot of stuff. He loved this guitar, so he ended up using it, and playing it and talking about it. Well, then Biff Watson, who was an acoustic session guy, he wanted to check it out. And then all of a sudden I started getting phone calls. It's like, hey man, can I check out that guitar? Can I borrow that? Can I rent that?
Wow.
And so it was just fun for me. I'm like, sure, take it, use it. It's mine. I'm proud.
Yeah.
Well, one of the session guys wanted to borrow it. And sure, of course. Well, I was working on a record with Mark Knopfler.
Okay.
At that time.
Okay.
And I said, well, I've got to go by the studio and get Mark set up for the day. But once I get that done, then I'll bring it to you. And it was right down the street. It's like, sure, that'll be great.
Was that here in Nashville?
Yeah, that was here in Nashville.
Okay.
And I took it in and I just set it in the corner. And, so our routine was I would go in early and it was me in the studio second. He's getting things ready for the recording session. Well, I'm getting all the guitars ready and Mark would leave me a list, some notes. Well, Mark shows up. And this is how in tune he is with everything. He walks in and immediately sees this guitar case sitting on the corner over here and recognizes it's not one of his. And he's like, what's that? And I said, oh, it's one of my guitars. And he goes, oh, cool. What is it? I said, well, it's one of my guitars. He goes, I know that. What is it? I said, well, I build guitars.
Yeah.
It's one of my guitars. And he goes, oh, that's cool. Can I check it out? I said, sure. So I opened up the case. And it's not the prettiest of guitars because I was still learning how to spray finishes, and there's runs in it that I tried to sand out and smooth out, but you can still, it's a pretty globby finish. So anyway, he looks at it and he reaches down, laying in the case, and he just strums across the strings. And he looks at me and he goes, can I use it? I'm like, sure. I think it was Brent was the session guy. I can't remember. Let's say it was. I said, we're going to have to wait until like next week. Mark wants to use this guitar today. I was like, okay, no big deal.
He strummed it in the case without picking it up?
Yeah, just strummed it, and he liked what he heard, and he ended up using it, and he's used it on some things since.
Several recordings.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I'm proud.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway.
Well, that's a great
So
story for that guitar. Only the second guitar acoustic you built with your ideas on how to change the structure and the sound of it.
Yeah, and then and of course the techniques that Bob taught me.
Yeah.
He built very specific guitars for recording, and we would build family of guitars. From like there was an acoustic trio at that time when I was working for him, and this was in the 80s.
Yep.
And we built a family of guitars for them that from the same boards, the same trees, so they had very similar sounds, and it was really, really a lot of fun.
It's a whole science.
But that number 2 is a freak of nature because, as weird as it sounds, I haven't been able to replicate that. And be it the wood choice, be it, I don't know, the environment, the kind of glue that we used, and just the entire setting, because when you're building an acoustic instrument, everything matters.
Let's talk about a couple of the other pieces that we looked at. You had the green weenie, and you also had a gold top.
Yeah.
So whatever the sequence of those guitars came in.
The green weenie. Back in 95, 96, I opened a little shop over at Soundcheck, the rehearsal complex here in town. And Norton, that owned it at the time, he's like, Dave, you got to open a shop over here. So I did. And
was that easy?
Yeah, it was that easy.
The next day you were there, right?
Yeah, I was kind of burned out on the road. I'd been out on several tours that were, I was gone for so long. And so I was ready to be home for a minute. I started working on guitars and actually building guitars to the order to the custom order.
Wow.
Out of Soundcheck. In building guitars, you make mistakes. And so when that happens, you put it on a shelf and you start over. And my idea of a good time was when I wasn't working, on a guitar for somebody else, was take some of those seconds, the scrappers I called them, and take that body and that neck and just put them together and build something for myself. I couldn't get away from this whole guitar building thing. the Green Weenie was a product of some of the scrapper pieces being put together. The particular body, the particular neck that was on that, where they didn't make the cut. They didn't make the quality control for an artist's guitar. So I built one for myself. And, of course, that ended up being a pretty magical guitar. And ended up being my main guitar for probably 20 years.
Yeah.
And I played it when I was out playing with Carmen. I played guitar for him off and on for 10 years.
Yeah.
And was his music director at one point.
Nice.
Ended up subbing on Michael W. Smith, subbed for one of the guitar players that had to miss some tour dates for a period of time.
You were teching for Michael W. Smith.
Yes.
And then you had to fill in.
Yeah.
Is that what happened?
Yeah.
So, but was it by the time that happened, you were already so familiar with the music?
Oh, yeah. The fellow that talked me into moving to town, he said, "You want to play guitar? Be ready. Just be prepared. Learn the music of who you're teching for. Learn the parts of that guitar player. You never know.
Yeah.
Something may happen. They may miss a flight. Somebody gets sick. You just don't know.
Yeah.
And if you can play the parts, you're right there.
Yeah.
Chances are you might get the call."
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
How
with
long
Smith.
had you been there when this came up?
I had done several tours with Michael, and it's kind of funny because I actually auditioned for every one of those tours, and I never got it. I never got the gig.
What was the scenario that came up where you had to fill in?
The particular guitar player that was there had to miss some shows to stay home and take care of some personal things, just some family things that had come up. And so I was approached, and it was just like, "Hey, you got that green guitar I always see around?" It happened to be the Green Weenie.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, I do.
So they approached you about it. You didn't have to go talk anybody into it.
Yeah, and it's and
That's awesome.
It's like the artist, the band, or the music director was like, "You want to sub for this guy?" And I'm like, "Man, I'd love to. Are you kidding?" And so I ended up playing a few shows.
That's awesome.
And of course, I felt like I was big. I made the big time.
So you've done a combination of teching and playing over the years. You didn't go from one right to the other. You've kind of done a little bit of both the whole time. I will list the names of your clients because there's a lot of heavy hitter guitar players on your list, and some of them, at least in the industry, are not. They're known to not be the easiest to work with, and they're going to be they're going to be particular and that sort of thing. So I'm sure it helps that you know the ins and outs of the way the guitar is built, and everything else. You and I met back in 2013. You were with Rascal Flatts. I was with Cassidy Pope, and the band Perry was on that Live and Loud tour, 2013. You're handling Joe Don Rooney's guitars, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I was Joe Don's tech.
How long were you with those guys?
15 years.
15 years with those guys.
Yeah.
And pretty much they quit on you, right? You didn't quit on them. Right?
This is true. I always thought that Rascal Flatts would be my retirement gig. We'd all ride off into the sunset together.
Yeah.
They would kind of retire from doing the big tours, but always do, some casinos, some festivals, just a handful of things. That's kind of what we had all hoped for, but things just didn't work out quite that way. And the band retired completely. And so it's like, got to find another gig.
Yeah, well, I have a feeling they'll probably do some reprise gigs.
Well, we all hope so.
Yeah.
I love those guys. They were so good to me.
Absolutely. So in the on the Rascal Flatts stuff, you've done a lot of stuff in the studio with them as well, but
Yes.
But also you ended up building a guitar for Joe Don.
I did.
Tell me about that.
I did, and that's the gold. It's a Les Paul shaped guitar.
Okay.
One day Jay comes up to me, Jay Marcus, the bass player.
Uh-huh.
He comes up to me and he goes, "Hey Dave, Joe Don's playing these stupid guitars over here." And he always gave Joe Don a hard time about, because Joe Don, he loved to explore, guitar sounds and different, oddball guitars. And he had some that weren't your household name guitars. And, Jay plays, vintage Fender jazz basses, and, from the 60s or 50s. And so he's looking at this weird guitar Joe Don had, and I don't remember which one it was. He's like, he keeps playing these stupid guitars. Why didn't he play something? Why didn't he play one of yours? And I'm like, I don't know, you know. And he goes, well, you ever tell him about them? I said, no, I don't want to be that guy. Hey, look at my guitar, you know, or check this out. He says, tell you what, you build him a guitar, I'll pay for it. We'll give it to him as a pre-tour gift, you know. Nice. And we're, you know, a tour coming up in a few months, and I thought, well, okay, what should I build him? He goes, whatever you want him to play. I said, well, it didn't matter what I want him to play. What does he want to play? So I thought, I just took that whole project into my head for a while, and I started picking Joe Don's brain. I said, okay, one guitar. If you could only have one guitar, what would it be? What's your desert island guitar? He goes, and he's a Gibson Les Paul kind of guy. That's every time you see him almost, that's what he's playing.
Yeah.
This particular day, he says, I always wanted it like an old 50s Les Paul gold top. And I thought, And so anyway, this was just all conversations, you know, between us. And that's as far as he knew. Of course, I'm making a list.
You're scheming.
Yeah. And I took his favorite Les Paul, and I took a profile of the neck, and, you know, and his favorite pickups all the things he likes to use, the fret size, everything about the guitar. And I built my version of a Les Paul style gold top guitar. It doesn't look exactly like a Les Paul, but it's that basic shape, and a few takes on it that were mine. You know, the headstock shaped a little different. Don't want to infringe on copyrights and, you know, things like that, trademarks or whatever. So I built this guitar.
And how did you present it to him?
We were in full band production rehearsals, getting ready to go on tour, and I brought it in. I showed it to Jay, and Jay was like, to heck with him, I want this. Like, you paid for it, you can do whatever you want to, you know. And he goes, nah, build me another one, you know. So we presented it. We called him out, and of course everybody was around, and we presented it to him, and, you know, as a pre-tour gift. And of course my name's on the headstock, and he was blown away. He looked at me like, really? Why didn't I know you build guitars like this? And I'm like, well, you do now, you know. And so right away he plugs it in, starts playing it, and one thing that just kind of made me feel good, and I am going to fly my flag just a second.
Sure, absolutely.
Jay came up to me a couple of weeks later, and he said, I was talking to JD about that guitar you built him. He told me he thinks that's probably his favorite guitar now. Wow. And I thought, yes. That's
very cool. That's something to be proud of, for sure.
You know,
so over the years working with him, you accumulated all the things that he loved, and you put it into this guitar. Do you know what year it was that you gave it to him?
No.
How many years ago was it?
It would have been probably maybe 90. 2019.
Okay. That's been
18,
a few years.
He played it for a couple of years.
Okay.
And then the whole world shut down.
Well, but he's still playing it. He's still using it.
Yeah.
Well, we've got to talk about some of these artists and some of these people that you work with, and some of these in the studio as well. So let me throw some things at you.
Okay.
You got some time with the Eagles and Don Felder. Just tell me about that.
I love Don Felder.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'd just gotten home from a run with Carmen, and my phone rings, and I pick it up, and it's like, hey, Dave Graeff. I'm like, yes. He goes, Peter Wiltz from that Jimmy Buffett tour we did, you know, a couple of years ago. I'm like, Peter was our keyboard tech on that. And he goes, I got something for you. I said, all right, what's up? He says, I know you're playing guitar now. You're the rock star, but I got a tech gig if you want it. Are you free this summer, or whatever time frame it was? Basically, it was a 3-month time frame, and I had 3 months off. You know, he says, what are you doing for a while? I said, well, nothing until August the 17th. He goes, great, I can use it till August the 15th. I said, cool, starting when? He goes, tomorrow. You want it? I'm like, sure, what is it? He goes, well, you're teching for a band. You know, this first leg is replacing somebody. This first run's going to be mainly Europe. There's a lot more to come. a lot of guitars, one guy. It's a big band. It's blah 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 blah. It gives me all the details. Here's how much it is. No more, no less. And it was pretty good salary. And I'm like, yeah, I'm good. Let's go. And so he says, great. I'll pick you up at the airport tomorrow in L.A. I'm like, all right, cool. Wait a minute. Who's this for? And he goes, oh, it's a little rock band from the 70s called the Eagles. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me right now?
Yeah.
And so it was Don Felder.
Nice.
And he told me, he says, Don, he says, he's very meticulous. He's very particular. And a lot of people misinterpret particular as being, and I'm not speaking just for Don, but I'm speaking in general.
Yeah.
And a number of artists I've worked with, they interpret them as being jerks.
Or difficult.
Difficult.
But they know what they want.
Yeah,
That's what it
they're
is.
not difficult at all. They're telling you what they want.
Yeah.
And what they expect.
Yeah.
And if I know what you want, I can give it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're specific, even better.
Yeah.
Well, Don was very specific.
Mm-hmm.
And now when I got there, I had no notes, no instruction.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you're Don's tech, there's your stuff. And we're in rehearsal at the complex over out in LA. The stage manager is helping me. Okay, his stuff's going to go right there. Don't know how it sets up, but here's the stuff. So I had 24 guitars and 2 mandolins. And so there was a spare double neck for the Hotel California. There were 2 of those.
Yeah.
And then there was a spare mandolin. For me, it was great. I was the kid in the candy store. Everybody's like, oh, that's so much work. I'm like, are you kidding? Look at all these amazing guitars I get to mess with.
Yeah.
And so I was there for a few days, and I'm just kind of pulling all the guitars out. All the strings that were in the workbox were, on that particular tour, they were Ernie Ball 10s. And for the acoustic, or for the electrics, and 13s for the acoustic. Thought, okay, I guess everything has 10s and 13s, so that's easy. So I restrung everything, and I tune up all the guitars, and just have them ready for him. Sure enough, here he comes. The stage manager brought him over. Don, this is your new guitar tech, Dave Graefe. Dave Graefe? Don Felder. And it was this very formal introduction. And Don was like, hey, nice to meet you. Hey, glad to have you aboard. Can you tune a guitar? And I'm like, yeah, I can do pretty good, I guess. And he kind of looked at me. He goes, I said, can you tune a guitar? And I thought, uh-oh. And I had literally just went through everything. So I knew everything was pretty good. And there was a particular black Clapton Strat that was right on the end, and I had literally just tuned it and set it down, so I knew it was right.
Yeah.
And I just handed it to him. I said, here, you tell me. And in my mind, I wasn't trying to be a smart aleck or anything. Kind of came off that way.
Yeah.
But in my mind, it's like, you tell me if this is in tune to you, and if it's not, tell me what it needs, and I'll compensate. I'll learn what in tune to you means.
Yeah.
Because every player's different. You know? And you got to learn how they play.
Yeah.
And he kind of looked at me, and he took that guitar and he put it on, and he's looking at me like through me, and he played it, and he looks at the guitar, and he plays, and it was almost like he was, and this is my interpretation.
Yeah.
It was almost like he was trying to find something wrong with it, but it was in. And then he stops and he looks at me and he grins. He goes, we're going to get along just fine. And there was this of relief kind of around the room, especially with the powers that be, the tour manager, the stage manager, the production manager. What I didn't know is that they actually had a return ticket for me to go back to Nashville. Peter, the crew chief, knew what I was all about because we had worked together, recommended me highly, and not the other guy they were talking about because they had worked together before. And he says, this is the guy, bring him in. Nobody else knew me there. So who's this huckabuck from Nashville? All right, let's see how he does. And Don and I, by the end of the tour, Don and I had gotten along so well.
That's great.
There were a couple of times, I remember he had a white Falcon, and this is one of the things I always tell people, it's like, be straight up, something happened, there was some damage done to this particular guitar. And what it was a local stagehand had a a big piece of pipe, and it turned like this with it. Bang! Hit the guitar, and it broke the binding on it. And it's a Gretsch White Falcon. It's not a cheap guitar.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at it going, oh my gosh, he plays that on several songs.
Yeah.
So the band shows up, and I went straight to him, and I took the guitar. I said, Don, got to show you something. This happened today.
Yeah.
And I explained to him, and he looks at it, and he was like, okay, what do we do? I said, well, I can fix it.
Yeah.
I am a luthier. I'm a guitar repair guy. And I said, I don't have the materials to fix it out here and make the damage disappear, but I can make it to where it's playable, to where that damage doesn't scrape your arm. I can make it playable. He goes, that'll be fine. But he was great with it, and I showed it to him after, and he was just like, that's amazing. So, but you could see it, but the big chunk taken out of it, right where your arm would go over it.
Oh, wow.
But working with Don was amazing.
You're with him for a while now. I don't know if I have the correct information. Either the guitar that you talked about that had the ding in it, or the double neck that he's famous for playing Hotel California on. Did something happen with one of those that Gibson's reproduced some of these guitars?
Yeah.
So what happened there?
Well, there was a
or some work that you did on the guitar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Well, Don came to me and he goes, hey man, I want to put another output jack on this guitar. And it was on Hotel California. The double neck, it's got a 12 string and a 6 string.
Right.
And he wanted a separate output jack for the 12 string, because he would take the 12 string straight into a preamp that would go into a Leslie speaker. Well, the 6 string would go into his guitar rig. So we had 2 cables coming out of it. So anyway, yeah, I can do that. So I'm getting ready to drill the hole, and I drill a little pilot hole, and I'm taking my time, because if you don't, you're going to like blow a chunk out. But the paint's going to chip something.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, hurry up, and pushes my arm. Well, it took a chunk out of the front of the guitar, and I'm like, that's why we don't do that. It's like, really? He's laughing, he goes, you can fix it. The guitar goes to Gibson. They were going to make a Felder signature model double neck.
Right.
One day I happened to go into Guitar Center with a buddy of mine who was buying something, and I look over in the corner of the platinum room there at the Nashville Guitar Center, and lo and behold, there's a white Don Felder signature double neck, and I'm like, oh my gosh!
Yeah.
I haven't actually seen the product. Let's go check it out. So I pull it down, and I start laughing, and the sales guy is like, what? And he's a friend of mine too, the sales guy, Tony there. He says, what are you laughing at? And I pointed out the little chip, and on the signature model, they had recreated the chip that I put in the guitar, the original one.
Wow. Of all the work you've done, that's what gets mass produced, is the big gash.
Go figure. Go figure.
That's a great story. All right, so we're here circling downtown Nashville. We've got to talk about a band called Giant, and a guy named Dan Huff.
Oh, yeah.
Old schoolers will know who that is.
Oh, yeah.
And Dan is a big-time player and producer here.
Yeah.
And you got to work with him quite a bit, and probably still do.
I do.
So there's got to be stories there. I
love Dan Huff. Dan was one of my favorite gigs that I've ever had, working with Giant. And, he paid us out of his own pocket.
Wow.
So the pay wasn't the best I ever got, but it was the best decision career-wise, the best career move I ever made as a guitar tech, because I went from being, Dave the guitar tech that does this tour and that tour and this tour, to being Dan Huff's guy. Yeah. And that in this industry, all of a sudden there's a whole lot of clout that comes with that.
Absolutely.
If Dan trusts you, I trust you. If you can do Dan's stuff, you can do my stuff. I was working on a James Tyler bass, and I had a problem with it. And I called James to, try to figure out the problem with this guitar. And I said, I got a problem with one of your guitars. He was like, and he was notoriously had kind of a grouchy attitude. Got a problem with one of your basses I'm working on for a client. He goes, no, you don't. Click. Hung up. I was like, what? Called him back. yeah, I got a problem with the neck. No, you don't. You're doing something wrong. Click. And there was something wrong with the truss rod, and I ended up figuring it out, getting around it. But a few years later, I call him up again, and I'm thinking, no, you don't. I'm thinking of that conversation. Well, and I called him up because I was working with Dan, and I was wiring up a guitar, and James had done the custom wiring on some of Dan's very specific guitars. And so I called him up, and I'm like, hey, this is Dave Graefe. I'm Dan Huff's guitar tech. Yeah, Dave, what can I do for you? So all of a sudden, I had this perceived, this clout.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he was so forthcoming with the information that I needed to be able to fix whatever it was I was working on. But yeah, I got that gig through a guy named Scott Davis. Scott was, everything's relationships. I was doing an Amy Grant tour. I was the guitar tech for Jerry McPherson and Chris Rodriguez on a Amy tour. Well, Scott was the drum tech on the previous Amy tour, the one I wasn't on. And he had come into the rehearsal just to say hey to some of the people. And somebody goes, oh, you need to meet Scott. And so, hey, Scott, how you doing? I'm Dave. We're talking. We both had really long flowing hair at the time, And anyway, we clicked and we became fast friends. Well, fast forward to the end of that Amy tour, we're over in Paris, France. I get back to my room. This was before everybody had cell phones. It was a long time ago, long before the internet. So I get back to my room, and my message light is blinking in my hotel room. And there is, it was a message, like 3 messages from Scott Davis, who wasn't even on the tour.
Yeah.
He had tracked me down and, hey, I'm working with this band Giant. I'm working with Dan Huff. I need a guitar tech for him for this tour with Giant. And, want you to be the guy. So I call him immediately, back to the States. Hey, this is Dave Graefe. Yes. When? And he goes, tomorrow. I said, this is our last day of I think it was the Heart in Motion tour or House of Love tour. It all runs together. I can't, I think it was the House of Love tour or Heart in Motion. And so anyway, I literally flew home, landed, got a cab. I lived right by the airport. I didn't even go home. I went straight to NCS, which was the rehearsal hall, Nashville Cartage and Sound. Yeah. Went straight into rehearsals with Dan Huff. Met him for the first time.
That was the first time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did day of rehearsal, got on a bus and left. Didn't even go home.
Wow.
But back to another little branch of that story, and I don't want to bore you too much. I had gotten in a situation where I'd stopped to help somebody having car trouble. I ended up getting run over, basically, smashed between 2 cars. Car ran, Anyway.
Where was this at?
This was here in Nashville.
Okay.
It was February the 4th, 1990. How do I remember that date? It changed my world.
Yeah.
I ended up pinned between 2 cars, just stopping to help somebody having car trouble.
Oh.
So months of learning, knee surgeries, learning to walk again.
Wow.
I had a buddy of mine named Rob Olds. Haven't seen him in years. I don't know whatever become of Rob, but he was the best friend a person could ask for at that period in time. I couldn't walk. I had braces and everything, canes and all this stuff. But I was laid up, couldn't walk. Rob was the friend that came over every single day, checking on me, harassing me, making fun of me, just doing what we do, And he comes over. He'd bring me a Guitar Player magazine. He knew I liked hot rods, so he'd bring me a hot rod magazine, or telling me stories. He'd pick me up, put me in the car, carry me to lunch, take me to Hooters for lunch, anything to get, kept me from losing my mind.
Yeah.
One day he goes, got this brand new CD of Dan Huff's new band. And I'm like, Dan Huff? Who's Dan Huff? He goes, you're a guitar tech and you don't even know who Dan Huff is? You call yourself a guitar tech, blah, 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 blah. And it was one of those days that I was mad at the world. I'm like, why me? And I'm like, "Blah, blah, 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 whatever, Dan, blah, blah, blah." And so he goes, "Check it out. It's a band called Giant." Plugs it in, and it was their first album.
Yeah.
And the intro to the first song on that album, I'm sitting there going, "Rah, rah." Whoa. I'm looking at, and I'm just taken by the guitar playing. And I'm like, I know this guitar playing. I know who you're talking about now. Just the phrasing, I recognized it. And so the first song of the CD starts, and I stop it. I said, I'm going to tech for this guy. And I'm going to learn how to play guitar from this guy.
Yeah.
Of course, Rob being, ribbing me and us doing what we do. You can't even walk, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, shut up, So the banter begins. So fast forward to, that was a,
That was the
that
first
was a
time you'd
couple
heard
of
him
years.
playing.
That was a couple of years prior to meeting Scott Davis, who called me and asked if I wanted to come out and work with Giant.
So when he called you out about Giant, you knew exactly who he was talking about.
Oh, exactly.
And you were eager to get there.
Yeah. And I was just like, wow, it's like you spoken into existence a couple of years ago, or whatever,
Absolutely.
however you want to believe that. So I ended up teching for him, and I ended up learning to play a lot of Dan Huff stuff. Just simply by watching him, picking his brain. I remember I would try to play that intro to that first song, and I'm like, okay, I got it. Check it out. And I would play it for him. I'm like, what do you think? Am I close? And he goes, yeah, you're pretty close, except for that part. He'd take the guitar. It goes more like this. And this part, well, it goes like this. And you're playing this. I don't know where you got that, because that's not even part of the song, but I like what you did with it. But no, you're not even close. I'm like, ah! So I'd take it, I'd work on it, I'd come back the next day, and we'd repeat the process, Wow. So
let's talk about the short period that you found yourself out with Ozzy Osbourne.
Well, I just went to fix some broken guitars, and so that was kind of the.
But this was Randy Rhoads is still out.
Yeah,
legendary.
That story has grown and grown and grown over the years. It's so funny. You tell somebody one thing, and the next thing
turns into something else.
You're playing guitar for
the
Eagles. No, you're not. No. I mean, this was 40 years ago.
Well, it was a magical.
So I don't remember any details.
Magical time, but you got to repair some guitars for Randy Rhoads.
I got to get my hands on those guitars and say, I met the guy.
Yeah.
And it was right before he died.
Yeah.
And the one thing I will have to say is I really wish I had a clue what I was in the middle of, because all I know, that was a cool polka dot flying V. I built a flying V.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And this guy is an amazing guitar player. And he's got cool long hair, I mean, I was this 19-year-old kid. The one thing it did do, it gave me a little bit of clout to be able to say, I worked on some of these guys' guitars.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
Once again, it's like the Dan Huff thing, say, oh, I'm Dan Huff's tech. Oh, here, let me open the door for you, And so it gave me a perceived clout. Did that make sense?
Absolutely. In Nashville, we've got a lot of acts that are based here with storage facilities and guitars. And in 2010, we had a big flood here.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people lost a lot of stuff. What happened with you?
Oh, we all did. We all lost it. I had 100 guitars that was underwater of my personal collection. Oh. But yeah, I remember Mark Hull, who was he was like the manager, the floor manager at Soundcheck. That's my title. I don't know what title he actually held, but he was working there. He called me up, and he's one of my dear friends. He called me up and he says, David, Soundcheck's flooding. There's nothing we can do about it. We can't get to anything. I just wanted to let you know. And this was real time as it's happening.
Yeah,
and your stomach just sinks. Yeah. It's like
you start thinking about all the pieces you have in there.
There's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
So he said, me and Ben and some other guys. Ben was the current owner, Ben Jumper. He says, we're going to go out in a boat tomorrow and take a look and kind of assess. You want to go? I'm like, anything I can do to help, I'm here. Let me know. I would love to go. And so they wouldn't let us launch the boat. So I called Rip. He was actually a guitar tech with John Mellencamp way back when I did shows with John. That's where I met Rip. Called him up. I'd been flirting with an idea of buying some jet skis from him. So I call him up. I'm like, hey, man, you still got those jet skis? He goes, yeah, man, you want them? I said, bring them to Jack's. Jack's Barbecue up there on Trinity Lane. So I met him up at Jack's, and we ended up launching them into the river. And me and him and a couple other guys, we rode out to sound check, and we rode into the parking lot, and we're looking in the door of sound check, just at stuff floating, and it was just like, oh, man.
It was a while before you could get in there.
Yeah, it was a week. I was working with Rascal Flatts at the time, and we had just unloaded all of our gear back into sound check. So we lost all of the touring gear from that year. There was a shelf that was in my locker, yay high.
Yeah.
The water went right to the bottom of that shelf.
Yeah.
Well, I had all the good guitars that I use all the time. I mean, stuff like, my 1958 Stratocaster, my cool Les Pauls, all that I just like to have access to, were all on the bottom, right there where I could get to them. And I had what I call my stupid guitars, all the ones that you get beat up for playing in Nashville, things with pointy headstocks and stuff. I had those all up on the top shelf, way back out of the way. Those were the ones that survived.
Those survived, yeah.
But being a luthier, I was able to actually restore and resurrect a lot of those guitars.
Well,
and a lot of us guitar techs, we all just pitched in. We set up workbenches down at the temporary site that Soundcheck was using.
Yeah.
We all just set up and said, bring your stuff over. We'll see if we can fix it. We'll see if we can clean it up.
I was going to say, there was a lot of that work to be done.
Yeah, there was a whole lot of everybody just bailed in and camaraderie. It's like, okay, how do we get through this together is how we do. So
you mentioned Michael Jackson earlier. Tell me about your experience there, landing in Asia.
The best paid vacation I ever had.
Oh, yeah.
I get a phone call one day. I was actually working for Winona, and we were in the middle of a tour, and I get a phone call from Randy Weitzel. Randy was the monitor engineer on Amy's Heart and Motion tour,
okay.
Amy Grant. And he called me up. Randy was Michael's monitor guy for many years. And he called me up and says, Dave, I don't have time to explain. Your phone's fixing to ring. Say yes. Gotta go. And hung up. And I'm like, okay. So a minute later, my phone rings. Hey, Dave, this is Chris Turbot from Michael Jackson. Want to know if you want to come out and be a guitar tech with us? I'm like, yes, I do. And so we worked the deal out. And then I thought, how in the world am I going to, I'm in the middle of a tour. You don't leave a tour in the middle of a tour.
Yeah.
And Winona was a dear friend. In fact, at that time, I was actually dating her roommate. So, and who I was actually dating before I worked for her.
Oh,
so,
I see.
I had a much different relationship with Winona. She was my girlfriend's roommate.
Yeah.
And this was a long time ago. So I went to her and I called. Actually, it was my buddy Rob, the guy that came to my house when I had my little leg incident and helped me out every day. I called him and I said, hey, I just got an offer for Michael Jackson. I need to find a replacement for a Winona. Do you want the gig? And he goes, yes. So
Worked out
perfect. So I went to Tim Rogers was our production manager. I went to him, talked to him, went to Winona, talked to her, why it was so wonderful. She said, tears, because we were tight.
Yeah.
And I love her to this day. And, but she said, I understand, and I cannot offer you the things that he is offering you. Go.
Yeah.
Have fun. Live the life. Enjoy the experience. Come back.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we end up I end up on the biggest pop tour on the planet. And
This was a bad tour?
no, this was dangerous.
Okay.
Yep. And we rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed for seemingly eternity, like I said. Michael comes in the day before we left to go to Bangkok for the first show. And he hadn't been in on any of this rehearsal. Of course, he had been working off-site with the dance coach and the dancers and all that. And we ran the show from top to bottom, and he stopped us after each song, working out some very meticulous details that, how in the world did he catch all of these details? I will never know, because he was performing it. He was dancing and singing like there was 100,000 people out there. But he caught every little thing that needed attention, whether it was a mistake or, a dancer had their foot turned the wrong way. I remember the keyboard player played a different inversion of a particular chord, and he caught that, and then lighting cues being just a different color than what he wanted. And he saw how everything connected, the movements of the vari-lights moving a certain way, but the video and the dancers were moving a different way. The movements clashed in his mind. So, and he corrected all of this, and in such a very graceful way. It was amazing to watch him go. It's like, how in the world did he catch all of these things while he was performing?
Right. Unbelievable.
But
how long were you doing that? How long was that stretch for you?
The until Jimmy Buffett's tour.
Okay.
Months. It's like it seemed like we were out of the country for a year, It just, for a very long time. And we circled the globe, I think 3 times maybe.
So talk about some of your work in the studio versus live. You've got a whole different set of circumstances there.
It's a different world. I do a lot of work on a lot of records. A lot of this is thanks to Dan Huff. One more time, that name is it's like a cornerstone of my career. He calls me in to work on some of his big projects. In fact, he called me in to work on a Rascal Flatts album, and that's how I ended up going on tour with Rascal Flatts.
Okay.
They offered me the job. We hit it off.
Oh, very cool.
Some of the records that I worked with Dan on were, Megadeth. Did a couple records with them, with Bon Jovi. We did the Lost Highway album. He was playing on Shania Twain's first couple of albums, and I'm sure he played on all of them. But he would call me in to work with him on just doing his guitars and tweaking guitars, setting up, whatever, working on sounds. On Shania's first couple of albums, seems like we probably did some Faith Hill or maybe some Reba, some Leanne Rimes. I mean, it's like one extreme to another, just working on different things.
You spent a little time with Foo Fighters recently?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Once again, relationships, and everything is connected. You never know. People say, how'd you get the Foo Fighter gig? I'm like, well, a couple of years ago, I subbed for a Def Leppard tribute band. Well, the other guitar player became Dave Grohl's guitar tech.
Oh, okay.
And so, here I am playing Def Leppard songs, and, this other guitar player is Dave's guitar tech. Well, fast forward a couple of years, they're in the studio, and Chris Shiflett, the Shifty they call him, one of the guitar players, had this big guitar rig built. He normally would have like a big pedal board and a couple of amps behind him. Well, just through the evolution of gear and guitar, he decided to have a guitar rig built, and it was a rack with all of his stuff that was on his pedal boards in a rack off stage, and a MIDI controller that was made by RJM Technologies. And it's a really deep piece of gear and a very powerful piece of gear, and they're kind of looking at it like, I don't know what to do with this. What do we do with this? And Scott was Dave's tech, Scott Appleton. He's like, I got a guy. So he called me and says, what are you doing for the next 6 weeks or a couple of weeks or whatever? And it ended up turning into about 2 months worth of just hanging out in the studio with the guys. Well, my job, I was brought in to learn this guitar rig that was built for him and program it, work with his tech, teach him how to use it, and teach him how to program it. Well, the first thing I had to do was figure it out, which that's kind of what I do. I build a lot of guitar rigs. I've been building those kind of guitar rigs for many, many, many years.
Pedal boards.
Pedal boards and stuff, the big controllers, with Rascal Flats. I built all of Joe Don's rigs after his first big rig was built. I built, numerous rigs for him with satellite pedal boards on stage and off stage. I would do all of his control changes for him off stage while he's running around being rock star. But I built them so I knew them. I would build into the rig the controller for myself off stage, knowing that I was going to be doing all of his changing off stage. So towards the end of it, the production manager was like, so how deep's your commitment with Tim McGraw this year? I'm like, well, I'm committed to it. Got to do it.
They were trying to keep you.
Yeah. He says, well, if you want to change your mind, we could use you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I'd love to, but
it's great to honor your commitment, but that's a big gig to turn down.
Well, I would have loved to have done that gig. I would have loved to have done it. It's the Foo Fighters. It's like kind of the last great American rock band. In my mind. And those guys they're so much fun. Dave was amazing. He loves to barbecue and feed people. Pat, one of the other guitar players that I didn't work for, he and I clicked, and we just became fast friends.
Well, I want to ask you, is there any other names that you have had to turn down?
Well, yesterday I had to turn down, and another tour I wanted to do so bad was Ann Wilson from Heart. And I love her. I don't know her.
Yeah.
I love her music. I grew up with it.
Yeah.
The female voice of rock and roll.
Yeah.
Man, a legend. But all of her band, I don't know who's playing drums with her, but Tony, the bass player, Ryan, the guitar player, it's just like everybody out there I've either worked with, played in bands with before, we're friends.
Yeah.
But I had one Tim date right in the middle of it. And it was for a run in December.
Yeah.
And it's like, rats, it's not going to work. A couple of months ago, Pink. Got a call from Justin, the guitar player for Pink.
Yeah.
Right a week after that, I got a call to go out with Pat Benatar, who was opening for Pink.
Yeah.
Before that was the Foo Fighters, and Vince Gill calls me up, and I've known Vince for a long time, and I love Vince. And his tech was Benny Garcia for so long, was his childhood best friend. Passed away. He called me up one evening, and he goes, "Hey, Dave, I know you and Vinny were close." I said, "I loved him. I'm so sorry."
Yeah.
And he says, "Well, thanks." He said, "I would be honored if you would come out and tech with me with the Eagles and fill Benny's shoes."
Yeah.
Well, I was committed to something else. I had a week before had committed to the Doobie Brothers, which, and I love the Doobie Brothers, but wasn't able to go do the events, But but it was an honor to get those phone calls.
Absolutely.
Whenever the artist calls you, it's like, oh man.
Well, that's a testament to the credibility that you've built, with these players and the people around you. Rascal Flatts, and I believe some other stories where you have played guitar off stage along with the band on stage as another member of the band in a couple of different circumstances. There's a story about you playing a guitar part for a musician on stage that could not figure out the part.
Well, there are a lot of situations, a lot of musicians that play off stage. A lot of my friends play with bands that are like the biggest bands in rock and roll. We'll play keyboards off stage or another guitar off stage. Well, as a guitar tech, you're right there. And being a guitar player, okay, they don't have to hire another guy or another person to come in. They're, like, for example, the Michael W. Smith, I ended up being the sub on Rascal Flatts. There were a few times, playoffs where I would be sitting over there playing away, and I remember going back to the name Dan Huff again. Dan produced them, and he was out. We were playing at Wrigley Field, and so I'm just playing I'm just going to town doing the playoff, while the guys, are, high-fiving the crowds, doing the big grand finale, and they're exiting, and I'm playing the part because it's a part.
Yeah.
Needs to be in there. And I remember Dan sitting over in my world going, "Graef, man, go!" And I turned around, and here's Dan Hoff, who is, one of the biggest heroes of mine as a guitar player, going, "Yeah!" So what a cool thing that was. It was a great shot in the arm for me.
Absolutely.
But I was on one of the other ones. I was on Michael Jackson. I'm an 80s kind of rock shredder. That's what I do. That's the guitar acrobatics and all that. I love that stuff. And being able to play that paid off in a situation where there was a new person in one of the roles there who was more of a blues player and not necessarily so much a shredder. Another part of this was, like, on the end of one of the songs, there was a play-off to the song where she would play a part of the song and then come back and change, like, the wardrobe. There was this big, it was a big headdress, and it was like these big horns that went up, and it had this fiber optic rope that was frayed out, and it just glowed. The fiber optic rope was dropped into the laser table, so you had these lasers shooting everywhere, and out of her guitar there was lasers coming out of it. And then she would come back to the back, and myself and the wardrobe people, we would take the headdress off. I would take the laser guitar, hand her another guitar that was a stunt guitar, and it was loaded with pyro charges. And so, she's going around shooting these pyro charges off. It wasn't even a functioning guitar.
I see.
It was a body and neck bolted together.
So you were playing off stage while she was playing the air guitar.
The rig, playing, as she's running around, and I'm back there just shredding away on the outro of a song, and it ended up being a convenience thing. Okay, maybe on this one too, maybe on that one, next thing
Pretty soon you're playing a lot.
It's fun to end up, playing feeling like I'm playing a viable part as a musician.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though I'm the guitar tech.
Yeah, but the audience is hearing it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And so I can indeed say, yeah, I play guitar for Michael Jackson.
There you go. Awesome.
Sitting back here in the corner, but
because they could have put that stuff on tracks if they wanted to.
And some of it was there was some parts that were. So,
who's a guitar player? Who has like the most guitars? Somebody that you've worked with
has the most guitars. Me. I do.
Yeah. How many do you think you own?
I think the last time I did a manifest, and this is post sound check flood, so take away those 100 guitars.
Oh wow.
I think probably 170 or 80 or something. I don't know. So I need to do another manifest for insurance purposes and maybe sell a few or give some away to some kids.
Okay.
Something.
So any of these artists that
guitar collections?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Don Felder has some amazing guitars.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And it was so fun to watch him and Joe. They would look at each other's rack of guitars and
Joe Walsh.
Yeah. I'd see Joe looking over at Don's rack and I'm like, get out of here. And next day I'd see one of Don's guitars, show up in his rack. I'm like, I see what. But then Don would come over and he'd say, hey Dave, do I have one of those? And Joe's playing a particular guitar. I'm like, no. He goes, well, get me one. You know what? Give me one of each color.
Oh,
and I'm like, okay, So
I know Joe Walsh has quite a collection.
Yeah, he's got a lot of a collection. There's a particular guy that owns a studio in town I do a lot of work for. It's fun for me because he's got some great guitars. And then he hands me one more guitar. Just play this one. Don't you do anything to it. Just play it. So I'm playing it, and I'm like, it's an old Jazz Master. And I'm like, this is an amazing guitar. And Jazz Masters, they're a little, they're kind of squirrely. But this one was just rock solid. And I'm like, wow, this is great. So I critiqued the guitar, and he goes, you didn't feel any mojo? I said, no. I think, he says, well, that one was Jimi Hendrix's. Man. And I'm like, I just proved that the mojo is in the hands of the player. It's,
absolutely.
It's the touch of the master's hand,
Absolutely. You do find that, as a guitar player yourself, You're always in search of the perfect tone,
Oh yeah,
but so many players have the tone in their hands.
it's all in their hands.
What makes a good guitar tech, and what are some things that you would recommend to somebody wanting to kind of do the kind of work that you do?
You know, somebody recently approached me and said, hey, somebody that works for me in my guitar factory wants to be a touring tech. Can you help her out? Sure, come on over. You know, ask questions. If you don't know something, don't be afraid to ask. Know your instruments, know the guitar, know the amp, know the rig, know signal flow, know how effects and switching systems work. You don't have to know everything about it. You don't know how to take apart. You don't have to know how to take apart an amplifier. I don't even know how to bias an amplifier. I've been doing this for 40 something years.
Yeah.
And but I know who to call. So if you don't know how to do it, know who to call. Every day I'm doing neck adjustments, I'm restringing a guitar, I'm fixing something that won't stay in tune. Know how to do those things. Learn. If you don't know how, ask somebody that does. Look it up on YouTube, a wealth of information. Other thing, it's all about relationships. You gotta know people, you know. It's all about who you know, how they know you. If they know you're a guitar tech, if they know you're a guitar player, if you're a cool hang, be somebody that's fun to be with. But relationships, you know, stay in touch with people because, you know, as Bob Abernathy told me from the Strasburg Lutherie, meeting him in that little music store in Independence, Missouri, you never know what might become of a casual acquaintance.
Yeah.
Keep in touch.
Awesome.
You know, so if somebody says keep in touch, if they give you their number, use it.
Yeah.
You know, they wouldn't give it to you if they didn't want you to have it. You know, don't abuse it. Don't be that guy that's like, hey, what are you doing? Okay, what are you doing today? How about now? But let people know what you want to do. Hey, I'm looking for a gig. Cool. I'll keep an ear open. All right.
I know you don't do a lot of social media.
Right.
So you don't necessarily have places for people to follow you.
I do, actually.
What is that?
I'm on Instagram.
Okay.
I'm DG Rockstar 64.
Okay.
And it's the number, like capital D, capital G, capital R.
Okay.
So DG Rockstar.
We'll put that out.
And then the number 64.
Okay.
On Instagram.
So they can follow you and see what you're doing, what you're up to.
Absolutely. On Facebook, I'm Dave's Guitars. And Dave's, you know, Dave apostrophe S Guitars. And I know there are several of those. So I'm the one that's in Nashville that has a little kid with a red guitar.
Okay.
That little kid is me.
Awesome. Awesome.
And it's a toy guitar.
Thanks so much, Dave. He is a guitar player, guitar luthier, guitar tech extraordinaire, David Graefe. Thanks so much, David.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks, Leon.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for watching. Let us know what you thought by leaving us a comment. You can also follow us on these social networks. And if you want to see more, please like, share, and subscribe.